It's funny, when I got Shudder for the first time, I went on Twitter and I said, guys, what movie should I watch on Shudder? And the predominant film that got thrown at me more often than I could possibly believe is Dead Heat. And I'm like, guys, I already have Dead Heat. I just need to get an excuse to watch it. Now we have it.
This is interesting, another, because we talked about in a previous episode, Shock Horror, and how I got just panned by critics. This is another movie that just got panned by critics. I don't think they understand what was the flavor of the movie.
Yeah. It's slowly seen a resurgence, and partially because of the In Search of Darkness documentaries that really praised it for that chunk of the film. Everyone came in and said, I don't understand why everyone hated this movie. Well, we're going to try and understand why everyone hated this movie and why they might have liked it.
And it's a perfect time, since Treat Williams passed away this year, to talk about Dead Heat.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, the undead Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. Hey, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great content and great deals and opportunities to tell us what movies we can review on the show, with, of course, a plug out for you when you tell us, later on. Both Kyle and I are a member of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're going to talk about kind of a cult classic from 1988. It's Dead Heat.
All right, zombies are committing crimes all over town, and detectives Roger Mortis and Doug Bigelow are on the case. When they come across a mysterious company and a resurrection machine, as well as an unfortunate on-the-job accident, Roger and Doug have very limited time as they fall apart trying to solve this case.
This is directed by Mark Goldblatt. He's been on the crew for directors like Joe Dante, J. Lee Thompson, Roger Corman, and James Cameron. Now, if you put those in mind of all those different directors, you understand what this movie's trying to do, where he got all his influences from.
Not only that, but he was editor on the fan-favorite film from 1993, Super Mario Brothers. So you can really see a little bit of the cheese, I guess.
You can see a lot of the Joe Dante. You can see a lot of the action of J. Lee Thompson of the beginning of the movie. That's J. Lee Thompson right there at the beginning of the movie with the car and shoot him up. And the screaming detective. You can see a lot of the cheapness of it with the Roger Corman.
Making it work with limited resources. Mark Goldblatt would direct one other feature film the next year with The Punisher, starring Dolph Lundgren. He did the first Punisher adaptation in the 80s.
When he lived in a sewer or something like that.
Yeah, a very unusual Punisher, and probably my second favorite. I don't know. But yeah, these would be the two major films that Mark Goldblatt would do, and that's maybe why you don't know the name as much, is because he wasn't a well-versed director, but he had such a career as an editor. And a number of other positions.
Well, that's why I initially cited the other directors. It's kind of, if you haven't seen this movie, what you're going to get into.
Yeah.
Of course, starts Treat Williams.
The late great.
Joe Piscopo, who just came off Wise Guys.
Yeah, which we talked about on The Road to De Palma. If you want to check out our episode on Wise Guys, join the Patreon to do so.
Now, you understand, you can watch, this is Joe Piscopo from Wise Guy 1987. But then you understand, after the 1988 in this movie, that he found the gym.
Yeah, he found the gym and apparently lost the acting studios.
Right. So it might have had barbells in his trailers, because it's very different. Joe Piscopo from 1987 to 1988. Rounding out the cast is kind of an interesting cast. This is one of the interesting is you have Darren McGavin, you have Kojak, the Night Stalker.
Yeah, that's always what I know him from. So many people I talk to are like, Christmas Story, which I didn't watch as a kid very much. And then Billy Madison was a lot of the people from my age group would talk about. But I always knew him as Kojak.
The Night Stalker.
I grew up on the Night Stalker, so...
Just an investigative reporter who just stumbles into crime all the time.
And happens to the best of us.
Very supernatural crimes. But then you have Vincent Price. This is kind of the second to last movie he would. No, not really, because he would do one with Dennis Hopper directed. But this is before Beetlejuice.
Pretty close to the Edward Scissorhands last finale.
Yeah.
And I was surprised actually, because when he showed up in that, what I would assume to have been the cameo, that scene that he'd filmed in there, I assumed that was all we were going to see of him, because he was getting up there in age, so like the less we saw, and then to see him appear again
one
near
last
the end of the
pitch
film,
of
that was quite surprising, and I actually didn't know that he was in this movie, so it was a very nice surprise.
I kind of forgot that he was right, because
it's such a limited role, but it's such a welcome and thankful one, I guess.
Of course, you have Lindsay Frost, who after the 80s kind of went away. Now, the interesting thing about, because we're from Minnesota, that Lindsay is actually from Minneapolis. I think maybe she went to the University of Minnesota for college. But her father is Warren Frost, who was a prominent actor, TV actor. He was a guest star from Barry Mason to everything.
Twin Peaks.
In Twin Peaks. He was in Twin Peaks, yes. So it's interesting to see Lindsay Frost, but she kind of went away almost after this movie.
What's crazy is I recognize when I saw her in this film. I don't know how I recognized her, but I recognized her from 15 years later. She was in the Ring remake with Naomi Watts. She was the parent of one of the dead children at the beginning of the film. I don't know why. I don't watch The Ring that often, but I saw
You're
her
like
and
that.
I was like,
You did the Leonardo thing. You did the Leonardo.
I absolutely did that.
Yeah, but she just looks like a Minnesota girl.
That's true.
Yeah. Of course, Treat Williams' name in this movie is Roger Mortis. Rigor Mortis.
What
Roger
a great
Mortis.
title for a character, and then they didn't do anything with Doug Bigelow.
Doug Bigelow.
Like they just like pulled out a random name generator and like.
Yeah, you're Doug Bigelow. Read it. Yeah.
And again, that's a very.
Why the hell just use the name from Wise Guys?
Whatever,
It's just
like same guy.
Dick Stein.
He turned to a life of helping others.
Dick Stein. So, right, this has a lot of what came out from like the 1988s. Now, I was raised in the 80s, and in 1988 I was 11. This doesn't seem like 80s to me. When you say 80s, I think like 85, 86. This seems like we're trying to get out of it, because if you look, it's very that silver, gray, bluish kind of tones we get in the late 80s. Very much like RoboCop kind of started this very metallic aesthetic.
Yeah.
Where we got away from pastels and pop colors. This very much looks like everybody's got to wear suits that very that blue-gray Metallica look. Metallic.
Yeah, it seems like the content is very indicative of slightly earlier in the 80s, and the style is getting itself almost into the 90s. Like it's a separation of these two, which I don't inherently think like clash, but you can tell like there's this shifting of time, which was what 1988 really was we were starting to get that evolution in what we would see
pulling away
in the
from the
90s.
gaudiness of just big hair and everything, that we're going a little bit, I would say in the late 80s, like sleek.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and
very
as we'll be
sleek.
talking about later on this month on the Patreon, 1988 was such an explosive time for horror
movie.
films
Yeah.
that it was almost like the studios and the filmmakers knew that we're hitting the end of this like excess train, and they're just throwing every idea at the wall to see what they can figure out. Because there's some greats, there's some real failures in '88. There's a whole mix of stuff that's weird going on in that year, and so it seems like this is kind of like the perfect movie to make in 1988, because I love when you have a standard idea for a film and then just add zombies, like how Shaun of the Dead is a rom-com but with zombies. This is a buddy cop movie but with zombies.
It's almost like Lethal Weapon, but with zombies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cinematography is Robert D. Yeoman. He also did cinematography for Rampage with Billy Friedkin. He was cinematography for Johnny B. Good. Got a lot of accolades for Drugstore Cowboy with Gus Van Sant. Great movie. Then he went on to do movies with Wes Anderson. So he did Bottle Rocket, and then he did Rushmore. I still like Rushmore. Rushmore. And then did cinematography for Permanent Midnight, which kind of start Ben Stiller's movie career. That movie from 1998, based on a true story of a writer who was a writer for the Elf TV show that got into the heroin underworld of L.A.
Happens to the best of us.
It happens to the best, especially if you're a writer for Elf, right? If you haven't found it, if you're interested, check out Permanent Midnight. It is one of the kind of a sleeper of 1988. And great cinematography and a simple, very great story to that as well.
I think if you're a director of photography and you can make a Wes Anderson film work, like because those films are very visual, they rely heavily on cinematography.
A lot of establishing shots.
Yeah, and I think if you can mold in with what he's doing and help craft, I think he's probably almost as important to Wes Anderson's films as Wes Anderson as a director. He even did my favorite Wes Anderson film, which is Moonrise Kingdom, and the one that got Wes Anderson his most recent Best Picture nomination, The Grand Budapest Hotel. So really, the guy's still doing stuff, but if you tried to tell me that the guy who did Grand Budapest did Dead Heat, that showcases what a wide range cinematographers actually are capable of.
Yeah, and also rounding out, he did cinematography for Dogma, which I really appreciate from Kevin Smith. He really fleshed out a great comedy with that, which showed his bones. And then the very much not talked about, and I'm trying to pump up a lot of accolades for. Red Eye with Wes Craven. I really still love that movie.
Oh,
There's a lot of good
talk about that movie soon.
Right, yeah. It's a great movie that nobody ever, a great horror movie too, that nobody really talks about. It's one of Wes Craven's last movies. And Robert D. Yeoman did cinematography for that.
God, yeah, we might just have to do a whole list of Robert Yeoman films. Like,
Yeah, we're going to have to list
God.
them. Yeah, because he can do a range. And then if you
I
haven't
knew a bunch of them, but I didn't know half the ones you were saying.
my God, if you haven't seen Drugstore Cowboy, that's another good movie. So, back to Dead Heat.
Yeah, the film also has music from Ernest Troost. If you don't know who Ernest Troost is, that's
Don't.
okay. A lot of people don't.
No.
But he also did the music for Tremors, a film we talked about recently, and you can kind of feel that Tremors-esque, Dead Heat-esque musical choice to the film.
Yeah.
It's got a bit of
Yeah.
that twang, a little bit of that kind of hip to it. Very, very fitting, I think, for the film, but also a musician who just didn't do a ton of other films.
No, right.
We also have editing from Harvey Rosenstock, who, I mean, my God, a couple years later would do Scent of a Woman, who would do all these like bigger name films. He also did a lot of smaller names films. One of my most underrated films in the last 20 years,
All right.
Repo the Genetic Opera, a rock
Oh,
opera
yeah.
from Darren Lynn Bousman. He shot that
That's
film.
an acquired
Another
taste.
really limited budget film that if you can edit that well, I think you can perform nicely. So,
Like, if you say that movie is your favorite movie, then like, I know what kind of person you are.
I know exactly what kind of films you're in. It's not my
Yeah.
favorely movie, but definitely, definitely good.
Yeah, because that's almost like you do a Gaspar Noir movie. It's your favorite movie. Then I know exactly what kind of person.
Yeah, and finally, production design too. A very fitting production designer, I guess, with Craig Stearns, because Craig Stearns did a
I was
lot
saying,
of
give it
production
accolades.
design. Well, he did a lot of production design for like a real world with this one weird thing. You know,
Yeah.
he did The Mask, a very realistic world, but there's one really odd thing about it. In Stanley Ipkiss, he also did Big Mama's House, a realistic world, but there's a person in a fat suit playing a
I
big
would
mama.
give thumbs up for production design for this.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that Stearns does really well is he kind of infuses this realisticness with this kind of zaniness and finds a happy medium there, and I think that's worthy of accolades.
So I know it gets pretty low ratings for anything you look up Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. It's kind of
11%.
right, and it's very lazy to just simply trash on the movie, but there are some interesting points to this movie. It is a footnote of what we're doing in the 80s. You kind of do these hybrid kind of movies, buddy cop, but meets horror kind of movie. I think it's another one of those, how do you sell it? Because people want the horror fans want the horror, the action people want the action, and you're not going to get too much of either.
And you've got to make sure to mind comedy still.
Right.
Like, yeah.
If you tell somebody you're going into kind of a mixture of a Roger Corman, Joe Dante movie, I think people would probably embrace it a little bit more, understand what you're getting into.
Yeah, I don't throw around the term guilty pleasure too often because I think like if you like a movie, you like a movie. If you don't, you don't. I think for all of this film's faults, I enjoy watching it. I had fun watching this movie. I think, people kind of crap on Joe Piscopo in this film. I think he's a far and away better performance in this film than he was in Wise Guys.
I don't think you fit in Wise Guys.
Yeah,
He fits
he
here.
fits slightly more in this film. They maybe have one too many failed one-liners in the film. Little things like, you spent 5 minutes underwater. Can you teach my girlfriend to do that? Like, there's so many moments in there where you're like, Joe, just reel it back.
Yeah.
But it's still much more improvement. I laughed at him far more than I laughed at him in Wise Guys.
Right, because what works with Joe Piscopo is we have to relate to Treat Williams. We're already annoyed with you.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
Treat
Williams' character is annoyed by him, too. That's a very good point, yeah.
And I think would be far more effective, rather than have the camera doing Joe Piscopo jokes, you watch Treat Williams do Joe Piscopo jokes, and you see Treat Williams like, Jesus.
Yeah.
That would be a better delivery. I think, especially when you work filmmaking, you want to get the reaction more than the action.
Yeah.
That would be a far effective. It's hilarious because they're in the car and he does this bit and you see Treat Williams like, "Gee, we're already today."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain if that's actually his character or him, but...
Yeah. So, that's, I think, what the punch is. I don't think people understood what there's going for, which is almost laughing at itself. I'm sure everybody after take 2 was like, I can't believe we're doing this. This is so stupid. But that was the punch. You get we should got a wink at the camera saying, I can't believe we're doing this movie.
Yeah.
And I think it would sell far more.
I think you have this weird infusion where, like, in any normal situation, and this is, I think this does constitute a spoiler, so if you haven't seen the film, just be aware of this. I think any normal film where you'd look at it and you'd ask yourself, one of these two characters is going to die and be resurrected for the entire film.
Yeah.
you would think that the straight man wouldn't be that character. You'd think it'd be the goofball guy. You'd think it would be the Joe Piscopo character that would be the first one we'd see resurrected. But it's not. We get the emotional arc, I think, that Treat Williams is able to give Roger Mortis, I think works pretty well for what he's doing. He dies. We feel bad for him dying, even though his death is kind of stupid. No business
he's
has
slowly
a bloom
decaying.
like that.
You're going to slowly decay. Yeah.
And I think that gives a little bit of an emotional resonance that you would normally see given to the zany, crazy character. So I think that's a clever idea. It seems like everybody outside of the Piscopo zone is performing straight until they interact with him.
Which makes it more and more interesting because you watch Lindsay Frost, and she just feels like, get me out of here. I'm tired of being in this movie, which makes it even more enjoyable to, like, because this whole world, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this movie.
Yeah. But when you look at Darren McGavin's character, he plays it straight until he interacts with the cops. Like he pulls up, he goes, "What are you guys doing here?" And Treat Williams' character says, "I'm just reserving a body bag." And then Darren McGavin does this comically over the top, like losing himself into the comedy joke. I think it works better because it's kind of he's changed by his interaction with these two loony cops. Yeah. Same with Vincent Price. Vincent Price is playing it 100% serious as much as he can. And only gets kind of
because he understands a Roger Corman kind of. He's been on Roger Corman film. Yeah,
he's the man.
He knows what you're doing. The silliness. You have to sell the silliness. You have to believe in it. Yeah. And I understand. There's a lot of problems with the film. It doesn't know what it wants to do. Much more heavy-handed. Do you want to have a focus on the love story? You want to focus on the buddy cop story? Yes, you should pick one of them. You want to stick with the buddy cop thing and then have the zombies afterwards. You want to stick with the love story kind of developing and then have the action be kind of beside. But you have a kind of all of it equal. And that's where I think it's the flaw. And that's kind of enticement to why it's a cult classic, because there's so much clumsiness to this.
Yeah, there's a great idea and a great kernel in there, and it just doesn't fully get to where it needs to be. For me, it's still a movie I enjoyed more than I disenjoyed. But looking at it like this, we talked about Cast a Deadly Spell recently, and you'd mentioned in that film that you wished it would have gone further. You wished it would have pushed it more.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I feel about this film. I
go
like
with the horror a little bit more. Let's see the decaying, like, when Lindsay Frost in the shower, it's kind of played for, okay, let's try to get a PG out of it.
Yeah. But there's moments of, like, when they're in the Chinese restaurant, the sheer lunacy of what happens in that scene where they bring back from the dead all of these, like, dead animals, and they're having this weird action scene there. That's the kind of stuff that should pervade the whole film. Yeah. But there's these little chunks of time, and the film is not a very long movie, so it wouldn't have taken a little bit more to just infuse that kind of sense of insanity to a lot of the other film. But there are these moments of dullness as we get to the next thing,
right?
That I think it could have picked up on a little bit more.
Yeah, you go to Lindsay Voss's apartment, and they kind of be intrusive, and I kind of been cut.
And until it hits the next, like, major story beat, you're kind of waiting for it. It hits a great one in that set, but it takes a little bit of time. And I think that's kind of a problem. You've got Terry Black, who wrote the screenplay. I don't know if he's related to Shane Black, because Shane Black is in this film as a patrolman. So I couldn't tell if these two guys were related or not.
Yeah, it's too common a name to really flush out.
Yeah. But Terry Black, who didn't do a ton of other writing.
I would be surprised if it really is Shane Black, but he just used an alias for his first name.
Well, Terry Black said in the interview that he was approached about a sequel, and he goes, "That's kind of a problem given where I leave this film." And that's true. It does seem like it was a film that was set up for a future installment, but the way that the narrative was built around these characters doesn't give them that. Terry Black would actually go on later on to do the most notable thing that I know him from is he wrote the video game Red Steel, which was a big deal for the Wii system in the 2006. It was a game where you could actually use your controller as a sword. And it was a fun little, like, mystery cop film inside of a video game.
Wow.
Did a pretty good job with the story, but that's one case where you have a writer who just didn't really know how to work his way around this film, I think, as much. And they could have used more polishing. Maybe get Shane Black in there to polish up the script a bit.
Yeah. Pick one thing. If you're going to do a hybrid, pick one thing that's the most dominant thing about it.
And then go for it. Yeah.
Little Shop of Horrors is a love story before anything else. And then the horror, and then the comedy.
Yeah. But every element that's there, too, is also pushed to its comfortable zone, where it's like we can get this as far as we can in this direction and make it work. And I think that's just what's missing here, but not enough for me to dislike the movie.
Right. There's a lot of things that are, I think what sells it and makes it a cult classic is its awkwardness of it.
Yeah, it's what it gets wrong just as much as what it gets right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It takes, when you want it to go a right turn, it does a left. You're like, okay, and another left. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy how often Treat Williams was so close to that, like, superstardom. You know, how many films that he made where he was just like right on the cusp of like being the next big star.
Yeah. Where he did fantastic with a movie that's kind of flawed, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead.
Yeah.
I mean, he brought it. Yeah.
He was there. He was there for
he
it all.
brought it hardcore. And then, like The Phantom as well. What did you think of our review of Dead Heat?
Yeah, if you've seen the film yet, if not, it's available on Shudder. If come on back and give us your thoughts.
I like to talk to people on comments, so make a comment.
Exactly. What would you do to reinvent the film though? Would you remake it?
I actually go with the more the love story, and then fall back on kind of like Ghostbusters.
There's a way to make this film work again. I think this is one that would be prime for a remake if someone actually wanted to get their hands on it. So let us know your thoughts on it down below. Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the show. And you can check out all of my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com while I'm still living and breathing.
You can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts, and just like Joe Piscopo, you can listen to it in the gym.